right, well, you may know Geoff Bennett best as a co-anchor on PBS NewsHour, but he's also the author of a book about Black comedians' role in shaping the American sense of humor. And News 4's Tony Perkins sat down with Bennett to hear more about his book, Black Out Loud, The Revolutionary History of Black Comedy, from vaudeville to the 90s sitcoms.
Well, first of all, tell me what drew you to this topic.
This was the book I've always wanted to read. I'd had this question, how was it that in the 1990s in particular, you had all of these different sitcoms, shows I grew up with, that represented so many different versions of Black life? And so the question was, how did that happen? And I approached it with the heart of a fan, the instincts of a journalist, and the book is the result of that research.
So give me a little sense of how that happened, because we're talking about In Living Color, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Living Single, Martin. How did that happen?
One, you had advertisers that were looking for new audiences, but you also had, waiting in the wings, these Black comedians, creators who really demanded authorship. So my first interview for this book was actually with Barry Diller, who launched the Fox Broadcasting Network. He saw sitcoms that were basically indistinguishable no matter the network, and he wanted Fox to be bold and brash and different. And so what he said was the first pilot that he greenlit was for a show called Not the Cosby Show. That show became Married with Children. And when Married with Children found success, that became the formula for Fox. And that's how you get a Keenen Ivory Wayans getting the access and the funding and the agency, really, to put his entire funny family on TV. And that's how we get the now legendary In Living Color. And so you see these other shows end up on television, A Different World and A Living Single, all the shows that you mentioned that have such enduring, have such staying power culturally.
The history of Black comics, Black comedy in America, like so much of our history, it's complicated. Talk to me a little bit about the origins.
I realized in writing this book I could not tell the story of the 90s or Black comedy at all without starting at the very beginning. And the beginning of Black comedic performance in this country is minstrelsy, this degrading, dehumanizing form where it was all about exaggeration. In some cases it was blackface. Over time what you get from that is the Chitlin circuit. And the Chitlin circuit gets you a Flip Wilson, and beyond that that's how you get to the 60s and the 70s in sitcoms, which builds to the 90s. So what you see is this one person opens the door and tries to keep that door open so others can come through and build on the form, and ultimately that's what happened with comedy.
But you mentioned the Chitlin circuit. A lot of these comics, Red Fox and some of the others, came from there. Wound up doing mainstream TV in the 60s. He had Sullivan Show, but it's interesting to me because they had to kind of do a different kind of act on those mainstream white variety shows than what they might have done in the clubs.
But that's always been the case. And one of the other through lines of this book is this idea of private Black humor versus public Black humor. Like what's funny amongst us versus what can be acceptable and presented to a wider audience.
What has been the role of Black comics in America, whether you go from Amos and Andy, Dick Gregory, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle?
It works on a number of levels. There has always been a level of social commentary. In some cases, there's political activism, an economic engine for sure. When it comes to the 90s sitcoms, for Black folks watching those shows, you got to see yourself reflected in ways that had not existed before. So they were mirrors. But they were also windows into Black experience and Black life and Black humor for everybody else. So, yes, these shows were funny. They had to be. They had to operate on that level. But there was also a social value to these shows and to Black comedy generally. And that's one of the reasons, that's the chief reason why I wrote the book.